people don't understand why I've been so obsessed about making sure the felonies that have been happening during the COVID terror campaign are prosecuted as felonies. Because it turns out, James, that if you are guilty of committing felony violations of U.S. law, the liability immunity from the 1986 Act and the PrEP Act liability go out the window. If you can show that this was a criminal set of actions,
then they no longer have protection.
Then they no longer have protection from the immunity protections under the PrEP Act and the 1986 Act. This, people, is the silver bullet, and this is what nobody's getting. The reason why this is so important, the reason why I have been trying to get people to pay attention, and the reason why I'm going to once again ask each and every one of you, if you know of, or you can send any information to an attorney general or to a U.S. attorney. The reason I'm so passionate about this, people, is the minute we remove liability shields from pharmaceutical companies will stop selling the thing that they sell only because they get the immunity. Listen to me. It's really important. And we don't understand this, and we don't understand this at our own peril. If we actually understood the law, we would understand the passion that I have to show that this is, in fact, a criminal conspiracy. And if it is shown to be a criminal conspiracy, all of the liability shields fall away. That's the reason why this topic is important. So let's talk about the anatomy of what we know to be an antitrust violation. Some of you remember that in September of 2019, the Dr. Elias from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Dr. Anthony Fauci from NIAID, and Dr. Wu from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention sat together on the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board for the World Health Organization. 3 different companies. See what I'm doing? 3 different companies all sitting together and all planning a commercial exercise that said from September 2019 to September 2020, there had to be a simulation run globally on an intentional or accidental release of a respiratory pathogen. And during that time, a global response for the commercial production of medical countermeasures. And James, I'm very careful in what I'm saying because I'm not going to get flagged on this, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
We're going to do
Gene
medical
therapy
countermeasures, and we're going to force those medical countermeasures into the market. And we are 3 different companies agreeing to do this. Okay? Stay with me, folks, because this is important. That happened in September of 2019. In November of 2019, Anthony Fauci sent instructions to a company, Moderna, and said, start making this particular medical countermeasure. Now, under the Sherman Act, that's what we call market allocation. And James, you said this before, that's picking a winner. Now, the reason why that's so problematic is because if, in fact, they were independent from each other, we could sit back and say, okay, he just, went through his Rolodex and M came before P, right? We could come up with something, right? M came before P, and because M came before P, he called them first. And that could be the case, right? I mean, maybe Anthony Fauci has a Rolodex and it's an old school rolling thing and M came before P and that's why I called them. Tiny problem. He had also funded them. He also shared patented technology interests with them. So now we have a second interlocking directorate problem, right? The
Yes.
first one is September 2019. Second one is November 2019. And the reason why that's so problematic is because you know that the company had no experience making any commercial product. So this was not market allocation among fair competitors. This was actually picking somebody who was unqualified to be picked because there was an established and undisclosed financial interest. Now, Dave, you just said undisclosed. What do you mean? Well, here's what I mean. And we know this to be the case because, unfortunately, we have now a General Accountability Office oversight document which proves this. In all of the NIH communication about their licensed technologies, and listen carefully, the report that they gave to Congress, in their presentation of all the licensed technologies that they had, they never disclosed the financial interest that they had in Moderna, and Moderna never disclosed in their patent filings the financial interest the federal government had. So,
and that's the bullet right there.
That's the bullet.
It's the failure to disclose.
We know that not only was there failure to disclose, but we know that there was an established financial interest between the parties. So this is the definition. This is not Dave's allegation. This is actually the definition of the violation of the law.
So can you walk through just the pieces? Step one, they did this. Step two, they did this. Step three, they did this. Just to tie it together. Just really clean.
So remember that the principle of interlocking directorates, remember what we said, the principle of interlocking directorates is by virtue of knowing the inside information that somebody else is doing in another organization gives you advantage that the rest of the market doesn't have, right? So Anthony Fauci is sitting in a position as a member of a board of directors. And as a member of a board of directors, he is aware of a thing that the rest of the market is not aware of. Dr. Elias at the Gates Foundation is aware of a thing that the rest of the market's not aware of. And please remember that the Gates Foundation has its own financial interests in a bunch of medical countermeasure technologies too. So remember,
including Moderna in a big way, including Moderna.
Oh, yeah. So we have September happen. Then we have this November agreement to actually allocate market. And once again, it's important to realize that step two, market allocation, was to pick a winner and say, we are going to favor one company over another company. A clear and compelling and prima facie violation of the Sherman and the Clayton Acts. Because it is illegal to pick a winner when you have the failure to disclose your financial interest in that winner.
So there's a couple of things. Remember when Fauci months later came out and said Moderna is the clear leader in the medical countermeasures, right?
Correct.
Number one, I think that's interesting. Number two, and I don't want to let this pass by, this is all happening before, right? Before alleged outbreak.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Absolutely.
so if for those of you who might speculate on, well, was it this? Was it that? Was it another thing? All of this happened before an alleged outbreak.
Correct.
Right. And so you can only assume that if you're picking winners for something that's, might
didn't yet happen.
Yeah. So you're also potentially providing the issue to solve.
Well, and what I'm trying to do in this show, and James, you're exactly right, but what I'm trying to do in this show is actually stick to let's presume that none of the things you just said even matter.
Okay.
And please understand, they do matter, people, because this is premeditation. This is where we get into the penalty phase, right? Because what you just did, James, is you did what any good U.S. attorney would do, which is to say, okay, hold on a minute. The fact that all these things happen is in fact a clear and compelling fact, right? So that's it.
And a violation of the law.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what you did is in fact the other piece of the puzzle, which is, can we establish intent? Right? Because unfortunately, it's very frustrating to recognize this fact, people, but breaking the law, and we talked about this on a show recently, breaking the law is not enough to necessarily get prosecuted. You have to actually show that there was premeditation or intent, or there was something motivating your actions. So, James, what you just introduced is critical to this conversation because we have the antitrust law violations happening, whether there's a pandemic or not. Okay? That's one set of laws that's being violated out of the gate.
But nobody would have probably paid any attention had there not been a pandemic. It would have just been a phone call.
Correct.
Right?
That's exactly right. But now we have an interesting problem because we do fast forward to the spring of 2020 when Moderna's leadership started selling their stock based on their public pronouncement by Fauci that they were going to be the winner. And
which
you
is
remember
also
what
a
happened.
violation of the law.
Also a violation, in this time, of securities laws. And what we were told is that the leadership of Moderna, and James, I'm sure that you understand, because I'm sure that we all understand that, you know, when we have been when we've been losing money and on the verge of bankruptcy, we would totally expect that the leadership of a company would have predetermined sell orders for their stock when their stock was falling through the floorboards, right? No. But it turns out that poor Stephen Bonsell and others at Moderna, these poor people apparently had their hands tied, James, because they had to sell their stock because they had told the markets that if the stock hit this price, then they would sell, or at a particular time horizon, they would sell their stock. And so the poor dears had to take billions of dollars off the table conveniently when Anthony Fauci was promoting them as the winner. They had to do it because they had prearranged stock sell orders. That's the story we actually were told, people. And the comedy of that story is you can have a stock sell order and you can revoke it.
Well, absolutely. But why would you want to? Because that stock wasn't worth shit until just now.
That's
and
exactly
it may not
right.
be worth shit in the future, so I better sell it right this second.
Which is exactly what they did. And so what we have is, as we move into April, we have the kind of the crowning achievement of the criminal conspiracy, because now what we have is a world in which we have the interlocking directorate problem in September. We have the market allocation interlocking directorate problem in November. We have the unfair competition that we have going into November. We have the market selection and securities fraud violations that happen in April and May. And then we have a funny little thing where I don't know if you remember this, but the news was that the Department of Health and Human Services, Pfizer and Moderna, sat down and they came up with the price for the medical countermeasure. Now, just pause for a minute, people. Remember what Moderna's pricing model was based off of. They said they were going to charge for their technology what their technology allegedly did, which is it allegedly saved you 3 to 5 days of hospital admission. They didn't say that it cost that much to make the injection. They said that it was worth the cost savings for hospitalizations. Now bear with me for a moment, people, because this is kind of an important piece of information. If 100% of the population that got infected all went to the hospital, then it would be fair to say that keeping people out of the hospital applies as the price basis for the intervention. That would be a logical thing to say. Unethical, but logical. But the fact of the matter is, most of the people who actually got an illness never went to the hospital. So there was no cost savings of 300 million people times 3 days of hospital charges at somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a day. Okay? But that's the price that they came to, and they, with their competitor, which is the coup de grace, this is the smoking gun. Okay.
Again, another one.
The smoking gun is they sat together and they fixed a price, which is the most important anti-competitive step of proving not only the collusion, not only the racketeering, but the anti-competitive market harm, which was the basis for both the Sherman and the Clayton Act in the first place. Why is this important? Well, it's important because at no point was there a market price. No point. A market price for, let's take into account that the public paid for the research. Let's take into account that the public paid for the development. Let's take into account the public paid for the market selection. Let's take into account all of those things and then come up with a price that is market derived and fair. Nope. What do? We come up with a price and we run the price through a third party, which is the Operation Warp Speed contractor, ATI. ATI is the fulcrum of the antitrust racket because the company that was responsible for Operation Warp Speed and the company that was responsible for the distribution of the criminal conspiracy product, that company knew that they were in fact fixing a price that harmed the consumer, that was based on collusion, and that had absolutely no basis and grounding in market dynamics. In short, let me just wrap this up, people. In short, we have, in setting aside all of the other things we've talked about, and I'm literally doing that for the benefit of this conversation, we have felony, criminal conspiracy, Sherman Act and Clayton Act against NIAID, HHS, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Moderna, Pfizer, and ATI. Those without question, and please understand, I'm not saying there aren't others. I'm saying those without question are in fact guilty of violating the antitrust laws of the United States. And here's without that criminal act and without that criminal conspiracy, we would not have the current campaign of terror. That's my point. That's what I want to deliver. And James, thanks for tolerating me talking way too much.
No, actually, David, I got to tell you, there was a lot that you said today that I didn't know, right? Because I mean, I've watched your interviews like everybody else, but it's a really compelling story because I want to let's take off the pandemic off the table, right?
Yep.
Meaning like, maybe a monkey and a goat got together and it really did happen out in the world and this came forward. What this is saying, guys, and this is what's really, really important here, right? Is that what they did was illegal, even if the pandemic was a natural occurring event, which is obviously being debated right now. It's not being debated by us, but it's being debated by other people, right? That they broke the law no matter what, right?
Yep.
Even if the medical countermeasure is the most healthy, wonderful thing in the world, right? Which I probably think that's not true. But the point is so, I hear all these conspiracies, guys, about, they're trying to prune civilization and they're trying to, depopulate and they're trying to do this and they're trying to do that, trying to do this. And the answer to that is maybe some of those things are true. But guys, here's where the rubber hits the road. Guess what? We found the villain again, and it was all about money.
Yep.
Period. It was all about money. I mean, in a massive way, right? These guys are hijacking, not only, the population, but they're hijacking the other powers that be and saying, hey, we just played a trump card and we got all the money, right?
Yeah.
And so, turns out, no surprise, when money's on the table, people make bad decisions, when it comes to human life and things like that, because every single time, I mean, you can just look back after court case, after court case, after court case, after court case, every single time when given the choice, humans, especially these humans will pick money over human life anytime because they're not considering the collateral cost of whatever's going on, whether it be from the pandemic or for any other reasons. And so, turns out it's about money again. Who knew? What a shock. But what I like about what you just did, and I don't want to lose, is the fact that, guys, the facts about the pandemic don't matter in this case.
No.
The facts about any of that stuff don't matter. There is a clear market-setting violation of the law, several of them, and it is very clear, and this is all publicly documented, isn't it?
Yep.
There's no, I mean, they're not even trying to hide the fact that they did this, because people have not been trying to hide these types of crimes since the 1990s, and Microsoft got off the hook because, you know, what Microsoft get here's a $5 billion fine, like, you know, whatever it is. And so, you know, we can hold these people accountable for this because there's no ambiguity here, right?
No.
All of that is met.
Yeah. And it's a great point, James, because, you know, having worked with 5 U.S. attorneys on an antitrust case back in the early 2000s, I had the good fortune of working with the U.S. attorney from the Eastern District of North Carolina, Central District of California, Northern Illinois, a couple other of the U.S. attorneys, and then worked with the Central Justice Department on antitrust violations. And what I wanted to do was point out that, and I know this comes as a kind of a hard message to deliver, but it's important for us to do this. It turns out that most of the attorneys, and I'm talking a U.S. attorney, so this is literally the arm of the Department of Justice in a federal jurisdiction. So I'm not talking about, you know, a junior rising, you know, associate or a partner at a firm. I'm talking about a U.S. attorney, right? So that's a pretty freaking big brass deal. Even they do not study these laws. And this is not having a go at somebody, right? I mean, if you're a U.S. attorney or you're a prosecutor and you have a shitload of things that you're prosecuting, you got, you know, crimes, and you've got, you know, murders, and you've got, you know, corrupt politicians, and you got all kinds of other things. You got a bunch of stuff on your plate. I'm not having a go at anybody for not knowing these things. The job that I had to do for the first probably 14 months of the exercise I was leading was educate U.S. attorneys on the law. That's not having a go at anybody. It's just recognizing that if you're not familiar with it, it is something that takes a little bit of back and forth just to get yourself up to speed on, okay, so what's the point? Why was the law there? Because we don't hear about it that often, and we don't hear about it not because we shouldn't. We don't hear about it because corporations, by virtue of the graft and corruption they've done in politics, have paid politicians, and then politicians have appointed judges who are willfully ignorant of this topic. So I'm not blaming anybody at the Department of Justice per se. I'm simply saying we've built an ecosystem. We, the people, have built an ecosystem where it's pretty easy to be ignorant of a thing that you've been paid to be ignorant of. So giant shock. That's the problem. Now, once the evidence is there, the challenge then is to say, okay, can I prove that there was collusion? Can I prove that this was not just accidentally violating the law, but it's actually a willful act of violating the law? And the great news is that as I just laid out this presentation, starting at the foundation of interlocking directorates, adding to that market allocation, adding to that securities violations by promoting a insider transaction without transparently disclosing conflict of interest and interlocking directorate interest, and then ultimately setting a price that was in fact anti-competitive. What we have is the entire cascade of the entirety of the Sherman and Clayton Act. Every single provision of the law has been violated. I'm not close.
And they only have to break one. And they only have to break one of them. Each one of those is a criminal offense. Not all of them, just one. And so don't think, well, maybe they can't prove 1 out of the 4 or 5, because each one is a violation. You know, I look red today, David. Did you notice that? I look red. I look red. And so I did that on purpose today, not because I ran in here late and I didn't have time to adjust my lights to my screen. I did it on purpose because I'm showing what an allergic reaction might be. And if I was having an allergic reaction, I would take my EpiPen and I would shove it in my arm, right? But at one point in time, that EpiPen would have cost me a lot more money. And so where I'm going, I know you know where I'm going with this. Where I'm going with this is who's David Martin to say this? Because, I love it on an interview. You talked about the fact that when you did this very same process for the EpiPen, right?
Yep.
And guys, if you guys remember back when, all of a sudden somebody had a corner on the market of the EpiPen, they were charging something like $5,000 or $20,000 per
Oh, they tried
pen.
to take it up to almost, I think, $20,000 a dose.
Yeah, $20,000 a dose. Guess who blew the whistle on that? Right. And I want you to tell that story because you were on all the news stations and everybody's celebrating you.
Yeah. If you
David
just put
Martin.
in EpiPen, CNBC, and David Martin, you find out I was the cover story.
Right. He's the one who blew the lid off of this and they celebrated him.
Yep.
Right. And so what you have to realize is that this may go much further than the companies that you listed because there's some collusion going on with certain social media platforms.
Yep.
Right. Because they are keeping necessary information from the public. Right.
Correct.
And so, the collusion that had to have taken place was everybody's going to step to the same beat and drummer. And so, there's a lot more people that can be held accountable and scooped up in this because you cannot collude with each other to withhold information from the public. And that's exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah. And we haven't talked about this and I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think it's important to point out, most people are familiar with the fact that Johnson & Johnson has just been one of a number of companies that is now being slapped with a massive multi-billion-dollar fine for the opioid crisis. James, you remember Purdue Pharma, which has now subsequently conveniently filed for bankruptcy and gone out of business so that they keep all their money and ultimately have no liability for the thousands and thousands of lives that they've taken and the millions of families and lives that they've destroyed. It's important to point out that during the same EpiPen period, James, that you were talking about, the same period of time, I told the producers at CNBC that there was a bigger story that they were neglecting. And it turns out the bigger story they were neglecting was the Sackler family at Purdue Pharma. Listen carefully, people. The Sackler family at Purdue Pharma had patented a non-addictive form of the opioids and then kept it from the market. They literally patented the science that would make opioids not addictive and then made sure no one could produce it by virtue of their patent. They held from the market the thing that could have actually solved the opioid crisis. And James, to this day, none of the U.S. attorneys that have been taking on the opioid case, none of the Securities and Exchange investigations, none of the mainstream media has ever broken that story, which is we have an opioid addiction crisis in this country because the corporation filed patents on and then restricted market access to non-addictive formulas.
David Martin, ladies and gentlemen. No, that's beautiful because this is not, it's easy to get into, well, who is this guy? Well, how does he have this information? Guys, when, prior to 2005, when the government wanted and used to file these cases, they went to David to secure evidence and to be witnesses. And you've been in front of Congress and you've been in courtrooms. Literally, you were the go-to guy to do investigations on these types or portions of these types of violations. And so, a big part of the work that you've done was requested by an arm of the government. We're not going to talk about what that arm was, but somebody requested you in the government, somebody very prominently in the government said, would you investigate an antitrust violation? Right? Now, that individual chose not to use that information because he thought it would cost him his career, and it cost him his career anyway. But the point is that this was not an accident. I mean, you already knew the information, but you were literally requested by somebody high up in the government to put this case together, and then they abandoned the case. And
that's correct.
And that's where the Fauci dossier came from. Just so you know, guys, this wasn't something that David just thought up in his dreams. Somebody said, can you prove antitrust?
Yep.
And David said, I think I can. And he went through and he put all the information together to put a legal case together. Then the party in question decided not to play that card and left everybody hanging. So
and so the point here, people, is I recognized, and it was beautiful. I mean, I had a lovely conversation. I so appreciated today's conversation that we've had, but I've appreciated the conversation that preceded this. It was really helpful for me to hear where it is that, just the basic legal literacy had broken down. And so the entire purpose of today's conversation, people, is so that you have the ability to share this information as a service, not on this case. Remember, I talked about this is the opioid case. This is the anthrax case. This is all of the other cases that have been like this. This is the EpiPen case. Every single one of these cases has the same footprint, and we may not be able to get a U.S. attorney or a district attorney or anybody else to take this particular case on. And I'm trying, and I'm trying. I'm trying every single day of my life to make sure that this happens. And I'm doing it because I'm trying to make sure that the liability and the immunity issues get wiped off the plate so that there is no financial incentive to participate in this criminal conspiracy anymore. And I'm working hard to do that. But I need each and every one of you to help share this information.
Yeah,
it turns out that this video was important because a lot of legal experts do not know what I just described.
And let's just be very clear, guys. This video cannot be taken down because we didn't use any of the buzzwords that would have it taken down, unless they just want to get picky. So this is the video to share. If you missed out on sharing Tuesday's video, I mean, we still have it up. It's still up in the community and other places. So guys, share. Join Activate Humanity's Facebook page. Join, We the People's Facebook page. Also, guys, as you're sharing, there's the summary clip right in the middle. Somebody needs to go get the summary clip of the violations.
Yep.
It's a 5-minute clip of David walking through each violation when I asked them to recap it, and they need to make that a 5-minute video, and that video needs to go viral.
Yep.
Because you need to understand is that, we're two voices here, and we're connected through light with all of you. But the truth is that without you, there's nothing here.
Yep.
We are starting to reach scale. So please hit share. Guys, this is why it's so important to support David and Kim Martin, because David's doing this research and he's fighting this battle. So I put the link back in to donate again. Thank you for the folks that donated and shared the platform. Congratulations on hitting 1,500 people. These lights around the globe are going to be everywhere soon, guys. I'd love to be able to do the math on the scalability of this thing. I'm sure you could, but we'll figure it out and show you guys a graph. What will be.
Listen, everybody, we love you. We're going to see you next week. I'm going to be out in Utah with James, so we're going to have some pretty weird schedules. Bear with us. We may be replaying a couple things. If you did not see my post on Activate Humanity, please go listen to the podcast I did with James Kunstler. If James, any of your team is out there, or anybody in the chat can post the link, that would be great. But the podcast I did with James Kunstler on his Clusterfuck Nation podcast, that podcast is really cool. A bunch of you did watch it, or listen to it. I posted it yesterday. If you have a chance to take an hour, have a look at that. Jan Anderson just put it up. Thank you for that. And we may replay that on one of the days that we're off air next week. But regardless, please share. Please take this information, use it wisely, inform yourself, and
please check out activatehumanity.com. Join the network. It's growing really fast. The community is amazing. David, thank you. Wonderful show.
You bet. We'll talk to you guys